Alright guys, Scrappy again. I hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. OpTic Texas have had a dramatic start to the 2025 season, but is their roster good enough to go back-to-back and win this year's World Championship yet again? Kenny has been pretty inconsistent so far, underperforming at times online, but Nadeshot says that is nothing for OpTic fans to worry about. He's seen it before on Los Angeles Thieves a few years ago, but Nadeshot knows completely Kenny knows what it takes to win when it really matters. How good will OpTic be at minor one in January and then major one at the end of the month? Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, there was some more drama on the map pool changes of yesterday. We saw Scrappy, among others, fuming, and understandably you could argue, on the changes that we saw. Now, my opinion was, they've had it come in, the way they've made the decisions on the snipers and these other things, it was about time, I thought, the CDL stepped in and said, you know what, we are going to make the decision. However, the logic on which the CDL made their decision, in terms of not consulting the pros and just deciding the rewind, hardpoint and search were going to be gone, that may be somewhat questionable. The interesting thing is, though, that according to Shotzzy a few days ago, rewind hardpoint was going to go anyway. That was the map the pros had not settled on, because many teams liked it, but there was a feeling that rewinds, according to some teams, didn't play very well, and it wasn't a unanimous decision by any means, but it was certainly, it felt like the pros were leaning that way of getting rid of rewind hardpoint anyway. Now for search and destroy, they wanted to get rid of Skyline, but that of course is not what happened. So yesterday we saw rewind was removed for both hardpoint and search and destroy. Hacienda was added in all three game modes, which in and of itself was somewhat controversial. And well, easyMap put together an article yesterday kind of discussing how this was done, why this was done, but also what the teams thought about it, which I thought was pretty interesting. So yeah, these were the vetoes so far this season, because the CDL basically said the only way that it decided what map changes to make with Hacienda coming in was looking at which map was vetoed the most. And if you look at the numbers, Rewind was vetoed 15 times, Red Card 12 times, Protocol 10 times, and then you see the other numbers from there. In Search and Destroy, it was vetoed 14 times, Skyline at 12, so yeah, I guess you could argue it's pretty close between Red Card going for hardpoint, Skyline going for Search and Destroy, but of course that's not what ended up happening. Now, I'll trust Austin's word on why this is not necessarily the best metric to use, because of course he worked with FaZe dealing with the vetoes for a good couple of years. So, you know, he says the following I thought was pretty interesting. The main reasons a team vetoes a map are the following. Your team is either bad at the map, so we just veto it. The opposing team is very good at the map, so we veto it. If you want to force X map as an option, then you'll veto a map that they would likely pick. So this is important to note here, right, that a map that's often vetoed does not necessarily mean the pros don't like it. It may be that you know that the other team does like it, and therefore you're going to ban it from the pool. If there's a map that is terrible and nobody wants to play, it actually won't get vetoed as much, potentially, as a map that's a bit better. So, you know, he talks about if you want some proper match reps on a certain map, you might veto another one. If you've got a role mismatch, if it's the auto veto, if they're beating us in scrims on this map consistently. But, you know, very rarely is the point that easyMap is mentioning here. A team vetoes a map because they think the map is bad. Like, it does happen, but it's far from the main reason why teams veto maps. So it's not really, and obviously he goes on to discuss maybe what the CDL should have done instead, but I thought this was very interesting. So he sent out a poll to the teams, and 10 of them got back to him within a reasonable time frame. These were the averages of the rankings of the maps according to the teams. So basically every team agrees that Vault is the best in hardpoint. Like number one, everyone basically voted for that. The second best map though, according to the pros, according to the teams, of the 10 that were surveyed, is Rewind. That's what which is interesting now that we were talking a few days ago that Rewind was apparently going to be the map that was going to be gone anyway, even before the CDL made that call. But still, according to the pros, Rewind was the second best hardpoint, Red Car was the third best hardpoint, Protocol was the fourth best hardpoint, and Skyline's the worst. It's tough because Skyline looks good. Hypothetically, it should play well. I'm sure that Treyarch designed it with the intention of being a good competitive map. And look, it's still in the map pool for both game modes, but you know, hardpoint and search anyway. But it's just not a great competitive map, really. And, you know, I can understand it, the way the spawns work, the way the map is designed. It's, yeah, not the pros' favourite, and that is true across both of the game modes. In fact, for Search and Destroy, the pros say Red Card's the best and Rewind's the second best. If you actually add up some of these numbers, you might well argue, given that, Rewind is second on both red cards third and first, Vault is first and third, you could argue Rewind might be the best map in the pool based on this information, although I would certainly say Vault when you consider Control as well. But yeah, the fact that Rewind, according to the pros, very close to being the best map, certainly in the conversation, and yet it's been removed from both game modes by the CDL. Now, the conclusion here isn't necessarily that the players need to be making the decisions. The conclusion may be, let's have like some sort of committee of, former pros, retired pros, personnel from League Ops, team general managers, player representatives, some sort of committee that decides the GAs and decides what the map set is going to be. Because, I don't think the pros should be in a group chat with, 12 representatives from each of the 12 teams and they make the decisions, because we know how shambolic that process is. It'd make much more sense if there were a couple of pro representatives that can give the perspective of the pro players in general. There were other individuals and they would decide gentlemen's agreements, but also they would therefore decide what map is to be gone, because I don't think the logic of just getting rid of the map because it was vetoed the most is the thing to do. Do I disagree with the CDL making the call rather than the pros? No, I think they actually should be making the decision rather than the pros. But the logic they use to decide which map should be gone should be informed to some degree by what the pros think, but it should be the CDL's final decision at the end of the day. I'm not sure Rewind was the map to remove, but yeah, intrigued to your thoughts and all of that stuff in the comments below. Thought this is pretty funny as well, just to look back on really, because we have in Black Ops 6 been hoping for some good maps. I mean, that was the #1 hope before the game launched, really. It's not really happened. And it's funny to think that, because COD Ghost at the time was considered to have atrocious maps, certainly at launch. Maps like Chasm and Siege were just horrifically large, and of course Stonehaven was comical. This was Freefall, if you guys remember. This I think was called Stormfront, which was actually I kind of had fun on this map, but it was massive for no reason. And there was a couple of elevators that you could go in. I don't really understand. This was Whiteout, of course, but even Brian's stats is maybe Ghost wasn't even that bad in hindsight. Because to be fair, in Ghost there were some great competitive maps that were played that year, although there were some also not so great competitive maps played that year. Looty, as he's typically done in the scene over the last few years, has kept an updated kind of spreadsheet on gentlemen's agreements. This I also thought was interesting though. So Twiz put this up the other day. Real question, can challengers GA the top A bomb spot for check-in bomb on Hacienda? So of course we know that this new room now, as well, it's been added to the new Hacienda. As I say, it was part of the old Hacienda Night version back in the day, but that's the version they've brought back to BO6. Now, whether this is good or bad is a matter for debate. Some players would prefer the original. Some players, I understand, they say, look, because it gives you another angle to the bomb side, it means that you can't just rush it as you kind of used to be able to do back in the day, because it gives defense some more options here if you can control the top side and middle. So I do get it, but yeah, I thought this idea was pretty funny that, what if we just GA the room? You're not allowed to go in there. I feel like that kind of gentleman's agreement is probably not going to be upheld for especially too long. But let's talk about Nadeshot right and his perspective on the OpTic guys going into the rest of the season. Nate was also giving his thoughts on players struggling to maintain their careers in the longer term and exactly why that tends to be. He was talking a bit about Parasite, and I think there's other pros to which this has applied over the last few years. If you're so good, it probably doesn't matter, but even Crimsix struggled with this towards the end of his career, and players didn't really want to play with him because, well, he just wasn't the most enjoyable teammate to play with, it seemed, was the general feeling there. Certainly, I mean, even for guys like Donny, Temp, maybe this applied to some degree, because Temp was a good player, but it didn't seem like he quite had the connections to maintain the spot in the league. And you can call it friendship league all you want, but that is the reality of the league at times. But he was also commenting on OpTic so far, because they've started well. Yeah, they lost to Boston. Since then, though, they've won their other 3 series, 2 of them with Hook, of course, on the roster instead of Pred after all that drama a couple of weeks ago now. But if you look at the numbers, Kenny has probably been their most inconsistent, weakest player online so far. And this shouldn't be a massive surprise. That's typically where Kenny finds himself, especially at the start of the season on a team like this. But, you could argue Kenny is kind of a newer version, this era's version of Karma in some respect, right? A player who, could easily get scapegoated, but is usually a critical component for the team actually winning when it comes to LAN. And Kenny's record in terms of championship wins in the CDL is better than any other player over the last 5 years. So, the numbers speak themselves, but understandably, players will see OpTic lose a series and Kenny have a bad one and say, well, maybe that's a serious problem. And we know that his search and destroy hasn't been so good. But Nadeshot certainly has some thoughts on that.
I think one thing players can learn from at least my time in esports, if I had to give any advice, is, you don't really want to burn too many bridges, brother. The perception that other players have in the league is really important to your career. You really, 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 really want to make sure that you have good relationships, strong relationships, healthy relationships with all the other players, man, because that could be the difference maker between you ending up on a team and the alternative not being on that team. So I've seen a lot of players ruin their careers because of that, actually. Not kidding. And obviously, we're talking about a small percentage of players. Obviously, in the league, there's not that many that are on that list, but it's all about relationships. Yeah, I don't think Parasite's a bad example. I'm not trying to speak poorly about him. Yeah, Chris, I think, struggled with the social aspect of competitive COD, and he was always a really good player. I mean, Parasite was hard to play against, man. He was a really good player. I'll always give him credit for that, but I think his personality sort of got in the way at times. Kenny's a certified inconsistent king. I'm not gonna lie, Ken definitely had inconsistent moments when he played on Thieves, but Ken knows how to win, and I feel like the good outweighs the bad. But there were definitely moments like throughout his tenure in Thieves where you'd see just stat line. You don't see what's happening, like comms, the map, where I'd be like, what's going on here? But Ken knows how to win, bro. Point play period.
So Nade clarifies this perspective here and says this was praise, not negativity. There were maps where Ken didn't have the best stat line, but us as spectators don't know what's happening on the map and comms the way the players do. Ken has superstar impact on the map every game he spawns in, but the stat line didn't always reflect that. I think that's the case of most top players. Bottom line though, he wins more than most current pro players. I think this is Nadeshot's perspective, right, is that, he was an interesting player to watch, Nade, or Kenny, for Nade, for example, when he was on Thieves. He would, often have bad series here and there, like certainly online, and then would turn up to LAN and be a completely different animal. And this is why OpTic fans were so frustrated with Kenny for years, because, Kenny would just destroy them every time they played on LAN, seemingly, over the last few years. And now, of course, he's part of the Green Wall itself. So, this is OpTic's performance so far. But if you look at their numbers, Kenny's rocking, 0.87, 78 Slayer rating, lower than anyone else on the team. And Hook's been pretty good, apart from that one terrible map that he had in their most recent series, I think. But apart from that, Hook's been pretty solid. But, he's got a 0.93 overall. Dashy's got a 1.17. Shotzzy's got a 1.27, which is kind of remarkable. Pred actually had a 1.17 over his first couple of series, and of course that, didn't last much longer than that. So of course it's been a talking point at the start of the season that Kenny's numbers haven't been, spectacular by any means, but I think we know that he's won so many championships over the last few years for a very good reason, and is only a player that tends to improve over time as well. He'll figure out the search and destroy at some point, and, when he does, that's when the league better be, particularly scared about OpTic's chances. They could still cause some serious damage. I'm intrigued to see how he does at the minor at the start of January. I think at the major, when it comes to LAN, Kenny's always going to be a bit of a force, but as he recognises himself, I've got to come back stronger on an individual level as well. I also think for Kenny, he noticed this in the past, that he can play better when he doesn't have to micromanage and worry so much about what his teammates are doing. And in the early part of a game, there's probably quite a lot of that going on, especially bringing Hook into the system. Kenny's got to be thinking a lot as the in-game leader of the team, really, about, okay, where are my teammates? What are they doing? How's Hook working with Shotzzy here? Are we setting up right for this break or not? And like all of those thought processes take away from his ability to slay hard. If he can be super confident that he knows what his teammates are doing, which will happen in due course, then you're probably going to see, a stronger individual version of Kenny. But very much interested your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.